Crises of Humanity, Chapter 11, Solidarity in Life. Why do people climb the high mountains? Why do people climb high mountains? Solidarity in life might be the answer. I first experienced the instinct firsthand that there is solidarity in life when I climbed Mount Everest without oxygen cylinders and was alone in a tent 8,000 meters above ground. Feeling utter loneliness as if I were left alone on the moon, I desperately looked for the trees, flowers, or birds in the emptiness of the ice. That was the old days, when this mountain was still quiet. I thought to myself, why am I climbing such a high mountain in unbelievable loneliness? Then it came to my mind that there is an instinct in life forms to try to expand the biosphere from the bottom of the sea to the highest mountain in solidarity. It has been conjectured that life forms have always sought to live in solidarity, and each species adapted to their environment from the lowest parts of the earth to the highest mountains, spreading to all the corners of the earth. For me, it was an epiphany, confirming that we all started with the DNA of one life 3.8 billion years ago. What I was vaguely looking for before departing for Mount Everest was probably the instinctual solidarity with other lives, which all arose from the same DNA and the nostalgia for the bonds of life which mankind was losing. Coming back from the mountains to where there are many people, the bonds of the people and the solidarity with other lives started occupying my mind. At first, my wife was in favor of this mountain climbing undertaking, but as the departure got closer, she started to oppose it, which was very painful for me. Although I carried out my plan, since then I started to see each life as having its only one consciousness. This experience of the loneliness in a tent 8,000 meters above ground provided me with an understanding which brought great pleasure, and I cherish it as my lifetime treasure. At the risk of sounding arrogant, I feel like the high mountains allowed me to look at life with modesty. The instinct of solidarity, forgiveness, and love between the old brain and the new brain. Up until now, I didn't give much thought to the belief that humans are special in this universe, and that God listens to our prayers and is concerned for our happiness. Many say that mankind, who has a new and developed brain, is more advanced than other creatures, the majority of which have old brains. But has mankind evolved as a living organism by having a larger brain? Lives were lived based on instinct alone for 3.8 billion years before we took over. Despite the fact that lives existed for several billion years, mankind takes pride in its birth 200,000 years ago. But why does mankind, supposedly more evolved than other creatures, create this crisis of the biosphere? How will the biosphere change if mankind disappears? There is also a theory that mankind, which is only one of the several tens of millions of species, uses up 40% of the blessings of what the earth has bestowed on all creatures. Since my wife was stricken with Alzheimer's disease, I have spent a lot of time thinking about the brain. Also, I started thinking about the relationship between the instinct of life, love, and forgiveness, and the brain. If all lives are divided from a single life, each life should have inherited the same familiar instinct in their DNA. The thought that each life has an instinct for solidarity and family in their DNA and in the old brain makes me feel the bonds of life and deep familiarity with other creatures in nature. But nowadays, a look at the anatomy of the human brain shows that the newly developed large brain in humans wraps over the old brain, as if to put the instinct in the old brain under its control. As a result, it seems that the conflict between the old and the new brains creates a divide between the mind and instinct, causing the mental and physical disease which mankind started to suffer. Couldn't it be said that one of the characteristics of mankind is that the instinct for solidarity of life has been alienated by the new brain, which prefers the inorganic? This may be the reason why mankind damages other lives which support solidarity. If we get far from the solidarity with other lives, bonds between humans will also be lost, and lonely existence takes over the mind. Is such loneliness what is called original sin in religions? When you feel lonely, it is the already fading instinct aching, a condition that could be termed as the heart's feeling of nostalgia for solidarity, suffering as it tries to recover the bonds of life. This feeling might be what we call love or charity. But since the love which the new brain searches for is out of the loneliness and not as an instinct, it will not easily reach the brains of others. I think that is why forgiveness became necessary along with love. As the instinct for solidarity decreased, selfish greed grew. The infinite greed for money of the new brain endangers the continuity of life and the lives of other living beings. If only the new brain evolved in a favorable way, bonds with other species as well as between humans could have been stronger. Anything good for life looks beautiful. The happiness of life is to be found within the circulation. I always feel relieved when I leave the urban area and get to play in the fields, in the mountains, and by the waterside, and encounter flowers, green trees, and hear the babble of streams. I think this is because pure water and green trees are good for life, and anything good for life looks beautiful. 10 years have passed since I have decided to move to the countryside as my final abode. My friends living in the city wonder what I am doing in the countryside and worry that I might get bored. The difference between the city and the countryside is that in the countryside there is lots of water, trees, and the creatures which are the origin of life. In other words, the volume of the circulation is overwhelmingly greater in the countryside than in the city. Watching the strange ecology of each single life, each of them with a unique form, is nothing but a miracle considering that they were all connected to just one life 3.8 billion years ago. I never get bored watching these different life forms, considering how in the past we were ancient brothers and sisters. Although my friends worry about my getting bored, with my wife at my side, I am never bored as I explore the habits and mysteries around us, play in the forest, watch the stream flow, and appreciate all the blessings of nature. The blooming spring flowers, the adorable newborn cute little birds, they are all lovely. They provide an instinctive joy when you think such life will be handed over even after we die. Encountering streams surrounded by green trees makes us happy because water and greenery are the origin of life. They also nurture life. My wife and I feel the harmony of nature in the flowers, in the fields, green trees and grasses swaying in the wind, and even weeds, as well as the rotating four seasons, and the silent rhythm of the falling snow. The flowing clouds, the murmuring of the stream, the raindrops dripping from the leaves, the songs of birds and insects. All of these are life itself and the rhythms of the circulation of nature. Circulation is life, the grace of life. What is good for life is beautiful. My wife had simply been stating that nature was so beautiful. When she started to understand the reason why it looks so beautiful, I felt that her life was soaring in the sky. How many more new leaves will we see? How many more autumn leaves will we see? Both my wife and I are wrapped up in the day-to-day grace of circulation. Dynamic life forms in the spring brings a nostalgic sense of childhood, and the autumn leaves make us ponder about the silence after death. We can put ourselves, who will eventually encounter death, in the place of the falling leaves returning to soil, entrusting their hope to the buds. In Japan, there is a spirit to love the flowers just as they are, as they exist naturally in the field. I've read an article saying that picking flowers and bringing them back is a desire to own life as an inorganic thing. Nature is a form of circulation. We are alive by the benefit of circulation. We have evolved to feel that benefit as beautiful. Other lives must feel the same. Maybe that is why being in a rich circulation environment heals our mind and makes us feel happy. I think that happiness lies in the water and the greens, and within the rich circulation full of life. The grace of circulation nurtured and enriched many lives, and the joy that we experience from witnessing that brings happiness to our minds. My wife's and my lives are filled with joy. Anything good for life looks beautiful. Food is life. Study of food education. Whenever I have a meal, I feel for the lives on my plate whose consciousness has an importance equal to mine. My heart freezes when I believe I hear them whispering whether I am worth so many lives being sacrificed. Many lives devote their lives to others in order to bring about prosperity and continuity of life. The delicious food we enjoy are those lives. There are many gourmet programs on the TV, but there must be a sense of emptiness if the food is being eaten without any sympathy towards the sacrificed lives. When you go to buy food in Japan, meat, for example, is packaged after being cut or processed, so it has no semblance of the original creature. So unless we teach our children about the origins of food in some way, they may grow up not knowing that the food they eat were actual lives. We now often hear the term food education. I want the concept that foods are lives to be taught. As a foundation for food education, I want children to be brought up and taught based on the heart cherishing lives. When my children were small, I thought about showing them a slaughterhouse. I thought how it would make them think about those lives were being sacrificed. Experiencing a slaughterhouse might have been the best way to show them how other lives die on our behalf. I went to see a chicken farm utilizing the broiler production method with my children, where chickens were put in a small cage so they couldn't move and therefore grow fat. The human equivalent for such size cage would be less than the size of a single bed. I wonder what kind of mind a person has to come up with this kind of cruel treatment when you think that these chickens have a consciousness just as valid as ours and are sacrificing themselves to be eaten by mankind. How easy it is to only eat without having to grow, breed, or slaughter. While we never made it to the slaughterhouse, I always recall that intent when I buy meat. Instead of saying the typical words, "Thanks for the food," before and after a meal, I would like us all to communicate to the food that you will treasure your life in consideration of the sacrifice the food has made, and convey to it your gratitude and remorse. At the same time, I would also like you to keep in mind there are many people, including small children in the world, who do not have sufficient food. If children can only learn at a young age, in school or from their parents, that lives help each other to create prosperity, that we can only survive by eating another, which is about the bonds of life, then they may have consideration and gratitude for the lives being eaten. And I hope that when they grow up, they will think about the happiness of others around them. How many lives have been sacrificed for me to grow and develop? And old as I may be now, I still need to continue taking lives. In this sense, how painful and sorrowful life is. Learning about life during childhood, solidarity of life, and the continuation of life. I was born as a human by chance and live my life through the support of other lives. My day-to-day life is based on the overall benefit arising from the circulation of the nature and bonds, that is to say, the sacrifice of many lives by the actions of other people. Knowing that my life was given by chance, the concept of living with solidarity, and the free gift of circulation, I wondered if the way I lived was right. But the vague image I had in my mind has become as bright as dawn. I've been reading many books, not knowing what I was looking for. When I was a child, I was said to be komachakure. It's a word from a local dialect, and I am not sure how to translate it, but maybe cheeky is close. Anyway, that characterization makes me smile. I was also admonished to be modest. But as I loved human beings as much as I loved birds and squirrels, what I saw in the behavior of adults did not seem like modesty to me. I was embarrassed when I went out into the society, still not understanding what modesty was. How would I feel if others did unto me as I did unto others? I grew up without having that simple notion of compassion. It is difficult for those children who grow up in a society where bonds between people are decreasing to nurture their own consideration, both intellectually and emotionally, for the lives of others. It is same with tennis, which I love. You will not progress if your practice strays from the basics. Moral education is discussed in the diet now. But I think the basic of morals is not such a formal issue, but rather an emotional consideration, an eye about the lives of others. Etiquette is recently being called good manners. Same as with morals, etiquette is simply a mindless formality, unless you have intellectual and emotional consideration, an eye for the lives of others, and without such, etiquette is just a form of vanity in disguise. Aren't the activities and athletic clubs at school, which are considered to be strictly disciplinary, also in danger of becoming a formality? During such an important period for the mind to grow, I want the upper-class men to be a role model against vanity in disguise. Showing consideration is a universal mindset. If you value all life and possess I to pray for happiness for all, your mind will be unhesitantly peaceful, whichever country you go to, whomever you meet. This is how I felt. From a very early age up to graduation from elementary school, I want schools to incorporate a curriculum that specializes in teaching consideration for life and the importance of sex for the continuation of life, because I think these are the most important basic wisdoms in terms of perpetuating human lives. If they learn about solidarity of life and continuation of life, they will think about being thankful for the blessings of nature, caring about the growth of the environment, and wishing for the happiness of others. That will also probably put a smile on their lips. I believe that the thoughts, words, and actions for thank you, I am sorry, and please will come naturally if they are said in consideration of people's lives, not money. It would be wonderful if the standard of living returns to people's consideration for each other rather than money. Had I had such education before marrying with my wife, we could have spent our days regarding each other and looking at each other as one precious life in our day-to-day lives. As my wife and I did not have the basic understanding of life in our hearts, we experienced emptiness and conflict for a long time. When the heart is not connected to the basic understandings of life, spending life together might be painful. What is scary about falling in love is that you force yourself to believe that all you see in your partner is favorable. But except for the fact that both partners have life, there are no commonalities, such as birthplace, culture, and personality. Now, if we have a basic understanding of life, we would probably have continued interest in each other, correct each other's ways of living, and encourage each other, and this will be good enough. There used to be a wonderful culture in the old days of Japan, where the basic way of life was to assimilate with the circulation of nature. But when the era of modernization came around, the emphasis on science and technology caused even the mind to have to divide its labor to such matters, which I think reduced the opportunity to learn about life. If we are to emphasize science and technology, high importance should be placed on educating the way the mind should work. Otherwise, humans will grow without developing a balance between mind and knowledge. Science and technology, which are not based on the solidarity of life, will become a dangerous weapon and destroy the circulation of Earth. Intellect and desires that are not based on life will not only make other lives unhappy, but will also lead to the collapse of the biosphere. The reason I wrote about my wife and my experiences after all these 80 years is that I felt that the fact that I was born by chance, that we share life and prosperity in solidarity with other lives, that we have sex, praying for life's succession, were the basics of life, something that I wanted to pass on to the next generation in this biological circulation. If I were to be born again as a human, I would want my parents to put me in a school where they teach what I consider the basics of life. The story of the solidarity of life, from the first life to my life. I think about the lives that kept going without a break from the first single life 3.8 billion years ago up to my life. I wonder what kinds of lives existed in between and how they entrusted their hope to the next generation. These things come to mind when I think about being raised by my grandparents and my parents, and the experience of raising my children and grandchild. Soon after death, I will revert to being molecules, so I wanted to trace my roots. I ended up only finding that my ancestors were tiny unicellular fungi. It is a very rough flow, but I have traced the story of life which came to my mind. I tried to depict in narrative form the history of life which prospered in solidarity and continued to entrust hope up to the present. Hundreds of millions of years after Earth was created, a substance that kept replicating appeared in the sea. A unicellular fungus wrapped in a film of fat arose. That was the birth of the first life. It seems that fats have the property to become round-shaped in water. Therefore, they are said to be wrapped. The unicellular organism replicated itself and lived on very little for hundreds of millions of years. Bacteria, called cyanobacteria, which create sugar by combining light, appeared. This is the origin of evolution. The process of photosynthesis produced oxygen as a waste product. Oxygen in the sea and subsequently in the atmosphere increased. This happened about 3 billion years ago. Then a large unicellular organism that incorporated bacteria which produces sugar in their cells through photosynthesis emerged. Is this the beginning of solidarity or the beginning of exploration? The incorporated bacteria transformed into chloroplasts. This large unicellular organism became the ancestor of plants. Despite the increasing oxygen, poison to life, in the atmosphere, another new bacteria appeared. These bacteria take in this dangerous oxygen by inhalation and then combine the sugars intercepted by other bacteria and this dangerous oxygen together, creating a highly efficient energy and discharging carbon dioxide by exhalation. This was a high-efficiency energy revolution which produced several tens of times more energy than what had been attained by the force of fermentation and by the use of oxygen, which was a waste product. Life was greatly activated. Now mankind is suffering from carbon dioxide, which is a waste product, but life has been efficiently using such waste from ancient times. Then a different, larger unicellular organism incorporated these bacteria into itself, creating high-efficiency energy, which they began to use. The incorporated bacteria transformed itself into mitochondria. This larger unicellular organism became the ancestor of animals. Plants, having chloroplasts, which provides nutrition within itself, evolved into a life form that need not move. Mitochondria convert nutrition which animals have stolen from the plants into a dynamic energy, and the animals came to exist as a life form which lives and moves around actively using this energy. For some reason, chloroplasts and mitochondria became settled together in plants, but I cannot understand the reason why or the consequences of the relationship between these two. Some research say the cell which incorporated the mitochondria incorporated the cyanobacteria afterwards. Anyway, since animals only have mitochondria and no chloroplasts, their nutrition depends on plants. The large unicellular organism, which is the ancestor of plants and animals, incorporated the chloroplasts or mitochondria in each body, but in addition, it created a basket called nucleus, which housed the important self-duplicating DNA. The scientific name of this cell is called eukaryotic. Going through such process, life becomes complicated. As time goes by, the eukaryotic unicellular organisms begin to cooperate, coming together to share work. This is the beginning of the multicellular organism. This was the big step towards the current complex and large creatures. This was about 1 billion years ago. At the same time, it seems that they divided into male and female as an advantageous strategy for survival. Maybe that is because even in one body, a mixture of cells with diversity is probably stronger when in jeopardy. At that time, the environment was quite different from how it is now. Since the rotation of the Earth was faster, there were 70 more days per year. Probably a day was about 20 hours. The moon was much closer to Earth than it is now. Somehow I felt like I am touching upon an interesting secret of the universe. I do not remember learning such interesting things in school. The ozone layer was still thin, and creatures stayed in the sea to avoid the ultraviolet rays. Life survived, adapting to the severe changes in environment. But until 600 million years ago, there were only several dozens of species. It was discovered from fossils that the number increased explosively to 10,000 species during the Cambrian period, which was about 500 million years ago. There are different opinions, and they also are in conflict with the theory of evolution. But fossils tell us that the various types of creatures currently existing came into being in the past 10 million years. When I was a child, I believed that if I kept on wishing that I could fly, feathers would grow on my arms. So I held large fans in my hands, tied a fan on my back, and jumped from high places. I thought it was the same with birds, that they grew wings because of their desire to fly in the sky. As we become adults, we learn about the mysterious ecology of life. It is natural for a person to think that if consciousness is a result of chemical reaction to information produced by the brain, then the consciousness that I want to fly in the sky is also related to evolution. Anyway, the unicellular organism, the first life form which appeared almost 3.8 billion years ago and survived about 3 billion years on very little, finally became multicellular about 800 million years ago. Then gradually, similar to our current form, with features such as hands and feet, rather than being in the forms of bacteria or algae. With oxygen increase, the ozone layer started to thicken 400 million years ago. What I imagine is that plants rose out of the sea, leaving their roots in the water, followed by animals. Plant prospered and covered the earth. There are various theories, one of which is that about 300 million years ago, a global volcanic activity covered the sky with volcanic fumes, followed by several million years of a cold period. And it seems that most of the plants and animals became extinct. They became respectively coal and oil, sleeping deep underground until they got unearthed by modern people and used as fuel. The ancestors of mankind, which were mammals, appeared about 200 million years ago, and were creatures somewhat like rats. The apes appeared 15 million years ago. Rats evolved into apes. Apes became the first to walk on two legs 5 million years ago. The appearance of current mankind was even later, some 200,000 years ago. Neanderthals appeared a little before that and lived together with mankind for more than 100,000 years before disappearing. Why they disappeared is not known. Looking at this flow of life, it can be seen that creatures have evolved in prosperity by mutual cooperation. I think that there is instinct for solidarity in all the genes of life, which makes me even more cherish the lives of all creatures around me. So far, that is the story of life. There are many theories in scientific publications. It is only since around the time I was born that we started to learn more about life and the earth. As a general story, I think what I've related is good enough, although it may be somewhat debatable, as it includes much of my imagination. What I wanted to say is, I wanted you to know how life had solidarity, how they cooperated, hoping for mutual prosperity, and how they died and handed over their lives to the next generation. I think about the life which has been continuing unbroken since 3.8 billion years ago, and want to entrust the hope of life and leave this beautiful earth to the following generations. End of chapter 11.